Hit while students were in their morning classes. In the first hour, on the first day of America's bombardment of Iran, 120 children and 26 teachers were killed in the town of Minab. Nearly 3 months on, their loved ones are no closer to finding out why.
We think it was done by Iran because they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. It was done by Iran.
I am the voice of all the mothers who sent their children to school, believing they would be safe.
There's only one entity in this conflict between us and Iran that never targets civilians. We don't target, Iran does. We will investigate, and we'll get to the truth, and we'll share it when we have it.
Whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
The truth must be brought to light, and Israel and the United States, who are the cause of this suffering, must be held accountable, not for revenge, but for justice.
Well, before this building became a pile of rubble, it was a school, a place parents and children believed was safe, a place where hundreds of boys and girls, some as young as 7, came to learn. Then, on the morning of February 28th, the missile struck. What survivors describe happened next is deeply distressing. The scenes are difficult to hear, but it's important you do hear them from the children who survived and from the parents who now spend their nights beside their children's graves. Because months on, the Pentagon says its investigation is still underway. Well, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, and his team are the first international journalists to report from Minab since the attack. Dom, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Yalda, right at the very start of this war, it was clear that something very, very wrong had happened in this town of Minab. At least 2 cruise missiles slammed into the town's primary school in the middle of the morning, killing 150 people, at least 120 of them, at least, children. We are, as you say, the first journalists from outside Iran allowed to come here. In the last few days, we've been gathering the testimony of parents, of teachers, of children and of bystanders on that terrible day. This town is deeply traumatized by the unspeakable carnage and horrors of that day, racked with grief, but also demanding answers. This is the story of the people we've been speaking to, and just a warning to those watching, for obvious reasons, a lot of this testimony we've gathered is deeply distressing. Dawn, deep in the south of Iran. We're reaching the end of a 4-day journey, heading for a place now infamous in the story of this war. As we enter the town of Minab, there are reminders everywhere of its terrible tragedy. We've come to the primary school that was hit on the first day of the conflict by precision-guided American missiles. We're the first journalists from outside of Iran to film here since the attack. There are still so many unanswered questions about what happened here. We meet brothers Fazl and Reza, who rushed to help after the missiles came in.
We were faced with an unbelievably horrifying scene. There were pieces of bodies everywhere. Hands, heads, a child's torso without limbs, all burned. All of this area was full of body parts. We were terrified and in shock. We were wondering if we were in a nightmare or awake and couldn't believe what we were seeing.
The missiles struck in the middle of the morning when the school was full of children, causing enormous loss of life. Staff of the school had already realised that Iran was under attack that morning and called parents to take their children home. Most of them didn't get here in time. Survivors say that most of the children, the girls on the upper floor of the school, were moved to that end of the building to a prayer room for their safety. When the missiles struck, they killed many children and teachers on impact, but they also tragically collapsed completely that end of the school, trapping and killing many more. 11-year-old Parastesh was on the school's upper floor when the missiles landed. She somehow survived but was badly injured. Her little brother, 9-year-old Aliaskar, was killed. She showed us his toys and his backpack found in the rubble and told us how she raced to help him that morning before a second explosion tore them apart.
اینجوری دستمو میخواستم بذارم رو شونش که بیارم تلف خودم که دومی رو زد ته شد. خیلی فاصله نبود که دیگه بهش برسم. میخواستم بیارم سمت خودم، فکر میکردم اگه بیارم سمت خودم در امانه.
Parastesh was found under rubble on the floor below. She was severely burned and spent weeks in hospital recovering. Jawad, their father, told us how proud he'd been of his son.
هم از هوشش بیشترم عاشق فوتبال بود، با عاشق مدرسه بود. مدرسه رو خیلی دوست داشتم، با فوتبال دنبال من می اومد. دوست داشت همیشه با بزرگترا بشینه، نه با کوچکا. اینجوری بود.
The loss of Aliaskar, he says, is impossible to take in.
من حقیقت تا الانم باور ندارم که پسرم نیست و شهید شده. تا الانم باور ندارم. دیگه تا هنوزم باور ندارم که علی اصغر نیست. حس میکنه همیشه تو خونه است.
Minab has had to extend the town's cemetery to bury all the dead. They come here every night to hold vigil for their children. This is actually quite overwhelming. Child after child, grave after grave, and almost 3 months on, the families still coming every evening to spend hours by their children's graveside. And talking to some of them, of course, is deeply moving. Mohammed Taha should have been celebrating his 10th birthday this night. Instead, his mother Khadija and family are by his grave mourning him.
میدونم اونجا خیلی جاش خوبه ولی من دلتنگش.
They made a cake for Mohammed. Happy birthday, they sang. May you live for 100 years. If there is an explanation for this atrocity, we haven't heard it yet. The evidence points to America. Iranians say these are pieces of US-made Tomahawk cruise missiles collected at the site. And we know America attacked several other places nearby that day. Whatever other targets there were in the area, the point to stress is this was a primary school. It had been for more than a decade and was clearly marked on maps. And yet it was struck, it seems, right in the centre of the building by missiles that are accurate within a few metres. It was either deliberately targeted, which would be a war crime, or it was misidentified, potentially equally a breach of the rules of war. Now, after similar incidents in Iraq and Afghanistan, America has admitted responsibility within a few days or at the most a few weeks. All it said for almost 3 months now is this is being investigated. They are stalked here by the spectre of war returning. It's not at all clear to what extent this appalling tragedy is being investigated and what's been learned to make sure nothing like this can happen again if hostilities resume.
Well, in a moment, we'll get the view from the United States with our US correspondent, Mark Stone. But first, let's go back to Dominic in Minab. And Dom, at the start of your report, we talked about the fact that some of these testimonies, all of these testimonies, would be difficult to hear. And it just feels like unbelievable grief there, just 3 months on.
Yeah, absolutely, Yalda. And what a number of the parents and teachers and others we've spoken to, what they've had in common is saying that they just can't believe that their children have gone. It hasn't really sunk in, and I think one of the ways of dealing with that is what you see here. I'm in the cemetery. Until 3 months ago, this was just empty land in the middle of the town, and it is now where most of those 150 people, 120 children were buried. And it is an extraordinary place. You know, it's almost midnight now, and you can see it is full of families here. They come at dusk, they stay for hours, well into the early hours of the morning. And I think, and some of them have said, they come here just to be with the children whose loss they've really not come to terms with. And it is deeply moving being here and talking to them, as you saw in that report. So there's that absolutely paralysing sense of grief. There is then that sense of trauma, because when cruise missiles, some of the most powerful weapons of war, go into a primary school, and it's just hard to believe that ever happened, but when they do, the carnage that ensues is horrifying, as we heard from Fazil there, who arrived on the scene, and he says he has been haunted ever since by what he saw on that day. Literally, the body parts of children just scattered around a wide area, not to put too fine a point on it. And Khadija, who was the mother who we spoke to, whose son's grave, Mohammed Taha, his grave is there. We spoke to her a few days ago on his birthday. I interviewed her again today, and she spoke for more than 2 hours. And for most of those 2 hours, there were tears just rolling down her cheeks. And she said at the end of that, that she just can't get used to her son not being with her. And there wasn't much left of her son. When they found him, there was a piece of his torso and a piece of his arm. I'm sorry if this is distressing to convey, but that's all they had to identify him with DNA, and he was wrapped in a shroud. And she described very movingly how, as they buried him, she sung his favourite lullaby, just clutching what remained of him. I mean, it's really hard to hear that testimony, so much harder, of course, and incredibly brave of these people to say it, but they want the story to be told. They are so frustrated that this isn't being heard. I think if this had been a town in Israel where 150 people have been killed, 120 children killed, we would have heard a lot more about it if the Iranians had done it to the Israelis. Part of the reason for that is that journalists have not been able to get here. But I think there's a contrast there, and the people here feel their stories have got to be heard, and they want to have answers as to why this happened. And the Americans have been, at the beginning, just misleading. Donald Trump saying that it was the Iranians behind this because they have Tomahawk missiles as well, which was a flat-out lie. And now all they said is that the incident is being investigated, which is in stark contrast, as I said in that report, with what they've done in the past, where they have admitted responsibility. They haven't done that yet publicly, and I think that is a way of compounding the grief of the people here who desperately want to have answers as to why this happened.
Yeah, I mean, Dom, as a parent, listening to you talk about these parents singing lullabies to their children, and the birthday song, the balloons, it really is just unbearable and gut-wrenching. And just in the last half an hour or so before we came on air, Donald Trump put out a Truth Social post saying that these strikes that he had announced that he said were imminent in the next 24 hours, he's called them off essentially because of pressure coming from the region.
Yeah, so the drumbeat of war is returning, and I think that's also the cause of great alarm, and it's not helping people here deal with what happened 3 months ago. As you say, Donald Trump has said on the Truth Social post that there was a plan to renew attacks, to end the ceasefire and start attacking Iran in earnest again, and we've heard similar sort of hints of that from the Israelis in recent days. It's hard to say whether that is part of the kind of diplomatic game he's playing or whether that actually generally was going to happen. What he's saying is that the leaders of the UAE, Qatar and the Saudis have said to him, don't carry out this attack because we think a deal can be done. So, this is the American president seizing an off-ramp or trying to find an off-ramp yet again. And I think the consolation for those worried about the return of war is that he still looks like he doesn't want to return to all-out conflict. The key issue here, Yalda, really is that, we've heard from whistleblowers in America who say that the Pentagon the Trump administration ripped out of the Pentagon units that were set up to avoid this kind of thing happening, to reduce the risk of mass civilian casualties happening by mistake because of American military action. And they would say this may be as a result of that. You know, until there are answers as to why this happened, until the Americans can say what their investigation, which is now almost 3 months old, has found, then the lessons from what happened here have not been learned. And the risk is if hostilities return, which is looking increasingly likely, then there is the danger of more and more Minabs happening, because the Americans, if they were responsible for this, which all the evidence points to being the case, won't have learnt from what happened here, and there's the danger of it happening elsewhere. So, you know, we are quite close to the Strait of Hormuz here. This is focusing the minds of people here. The threat of war, the spectre of war is stalking them, while they're also dealing with the trauma, what happened 3 months ago, and the massive grief they're going through, and I think will be continuing to go through for years to come.
Yeah, indeed. And how extraordinary for us to have your report, that rare access from Minab, where you're standing now, that cemetery as well. Thank you so much for all of your reporting, Dom. Well, I'm going to bring in our Mark Stone in a moment, but first I just want to remind you of what we know. This strike on that school in Minab killed 156 people, including 120 school children. And this is a satellite image from after the attack. Just look at this. Sky's forensics team has marked on areas which appear to have been hit. I just want you to focus on this top green box, well, because that's where the school is located. And you can see it here in an image taken before the strike. Now, the school had been clearly marked on maps for over a decade and was walled off. Some reports have suggested buildings nearby are linked to the IRGC, but there was no evidence of military activity at the time of the strikes. So, could it be that these children and their teachers died because of incorrect targeting? And who fired the missiles? US Tomahawks were filmed falling near the school on the day of the strike, and Iranian reports have shown American munitions at the site. Well, let's bring in our Mark Stone, who is listening. And Mark, of course, this happened 3 months ago. The Pentagon said they would launch an investigation, and still silence. We haven't had any sort of reports on where their findings have gotten to. And I know in the last day or so since Dom's reporting, you've been reaching out to the president, to the Pentagon, to try and get some answers.
Yes, and I've had nothing back. I sent Dom and his team's report to the Pentagon this morning. They have not responded. And I sent a link to the report, to President Trump, to his cell phone directly. And he has not responded. That doesn't mean they haven't seen it. Perhaps they have. But it fits a pattern whereby either there is no response, or the response is there's an investigation ongoing. You referenced Sky's data and forensics team, who've been doing a lot of work, as indeed have many other news organisations, a lot of work to establish what happened in the absence of anything official coming from the Pentagon. We spoke I think it was a week or two ago, to the Pentagon with some of what Sky's data and forensics team had come up with, and their response then was, "Good morning, nothing to provide due to ongoing investigation. Thanks for reaching out." It's the same throughout. And at the very beginning of this, a few days after the airstrike, Yalda, as Dom referenced, President Trump was asked what he thought happened, and he was very quick to say he believed that this was an Iranian blue-on-blue, effectively a mistaken strike by the Iranians on one of their own targets, or missed targets, as it was. Then, a few days later, he said that Iran has Tomahawks as well. Not true. They never have had any American-made Tomahawks. Tomahawks only made by the Americans. They've never sold them to Iran. So that wasn't true either. And then the sort of, they've meandered, the story has meandered, or the claims have meandered, but nothing concrete has come out of the Pentagon at all. The only time that Pentagon officials or the top brass can ever be pinned down, because it's very difficult for us to get access to the Pentagon right now. I'd like to be sitting in the Pentagon briefing room doing this report to you now, but we do not have accreditation. They wouldn't even let us into the car park this afternoon. That is the new look Pentagon. Instead, the top brass are
pressed by lawmakers on Capitol Hill. And last Thursday, Admiral Brad Cooper, who is the commander of CENTCOM, Central Command, the wing of the military that is prosecuting this conflict. If anyone knows what happened, he does. Well, he was asked about this by lawmakers on Capitol Hill on Thursday.
We follow all the procedures and have gone above and beyond to, in my case, personally warn the Iranian people of several instances during conflict where they were being potentially used as human targets. If they've been warned,
how did we then bomb 22 schools?
There's no indication that we have that has been corroborated. Zero.
How many schools have we bombed?
There is one active civilian casualty investigation from the 13,629 munitions.
So how do you explain the publicly available information that 22 schools have been hit and multiple hospitals?
There's no way that we can corroborate that. No indication of that whatsoever, Senator.
There's no way you can corroborate or no indication of it? Which one?
No indication.
Well, the indication is what's publicly available. There is indication. Have you investigated those claims?
We have not.
The woman asking the questions there is Senator Kristen Gillibrand from New York State. These questions keep coming. The answers are woefully inadequate.
Indeed. Mark, thank you so much for following up and reaching out to the administration and, of course, the Pentagon, but, of course, no answers as yet. Well, last week, the Pentagon's own watchdog found that the United States was not doing enough to protect civilians in conflict zones. Wes J. Bryant was the department's chief of civilian harm assessment until last year, and he joins me now. Thank you so much, Mr. Bryant, for joining us here on the programme. You saw there our report, and of course we heard there from the head of CENTCOM being questioned. You've called the Pentagon's refusal to comment on this issue of the bombing of the school in Minab as unacceptable. Just give me your assessment, having watched our report, and the fact that there is continued silence from the Pentagon.
Yes, you know, that report's, it's heart-wrenching, to say the least. And I would say, you know, as Secretary of Defense, or Secretary of War, as Hegseth calls himself, as the president, if you're not completely heartbroken by this tragedy, if you don't feel compelled to address it as a nation, to take accountability, there's just something simply wrong with your soul. And I'd say right now, for America, there's something truly wrong with America's soul. You know, it's beyond unacceptable.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just looking at these images of these small children, the fact that our reporter on the ground currently there speaking to their mothers, the grieving families, and yet they're seeking answers. They want justice. And you know, frankly, the Trump administration isn't even able to talk about where they are with this investigation, let alone any form of justice.
Right. And, you know, I can confirm, I am 100% confident. Well, one, that this was a U.S. strike. Two, that senior commanders knew this was a U.S.-caused civilian casualty incident, at least within hours of this strike. So, you know, the fact here is that, you know, senior military command, Admiral Cooper, for example, Secretary Hegseth, up to the president, they are mandating orders of silence to the U.S. military. You know, there are people in the military, at senior commands, at central command, that want to do the right thing here, that of course want to mitigate harm to civilians. They don't want to kill civilians, that want to properly investigate when that harm happens. They want to acknowledge it, apologize, provide redress. And those people are being silenced and pushed aside. You know, not just from a mitigation standpoint, how do we prevent this, but from a response standpoint, how do we respond to it when it happens? And what we're showing is, you know, this secretary, this administration, believe they have complete impunity. They're not accountable to anyone, not the American people, not our representatives, not the global community, certainly not the Iranian civilian population, who they claimed on one hand at one point that they were going in to free, right?
Well, what does this tell you about the state of affairs at present? Because, you know, I think about a series of incidents when the United States was prosecuting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Kabul drone strike, for example, in 2021, initially it was described as a righteous strike, and then it was later acknowledged by the Pentagon that it was a mistake and the families were given compensation. I mean, there's a whole host of incidents in Mosul, for example, in Syria as well, at the Baghuz airstrike, where there were investigations, and then the findings of those investigations were made clear. What does this tell you about this moment in the United States where we're just not really getting a sense of where these investigations are going?
Right. It's really a de-evolution of standing practices, and we haven't been perfect in the past. That's why the Pentagon Office for Civilian Harm Mitigation and Response was stood up initially to be better. But, those instances that you name, and I'll go all the way back even to 1991, the first Gulf War, tragic strike, a horrible strike on a civilian shelter that we thought was a bunker, killed over 400 civilians. Within 5 hours, the U.S. acknowledged it and apologized. The other incidents you name, we'll take the Kabul strike in 2021 and during the withdrawal from Afghanistan, where we hit an aid worker and his family. Well, we acknowledged that we conducted the strike immediately. Now, it did take a couple of weeks for the U.S. military to confirm on their end that, yes, they did mistakenly target civilians. But we acknowledged that immediately. And then, of course, once we confirmed that they were civilians, there was official apology. There was and continues to be redress to the civilian population there and the families involved. We see none of that here. It's just incredibly concerning. The de-evolution of standards, of practices, of lack of adherence to our own law and doctrine, and just the ethical and moral implications of this. And then I will add too, going to Admiral Cooper's statements, we are tracking, my colleagues at Air Wars and other non-governmental humanitarian conflict trackers are looking at upwards of 300 incidents of civilian harm in Iraq, or in Iran to date. So to say that the only incident so far is this school strike in Minab is purely error, or at worst, an outright lie.
Well, especially when we understand there have been thousands of strikes that have been launched. Wes J. Bryant, who was part of the department's Chief of Civilian Harm Assessment, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, in those first chaotic hours after the United States began bombing Iran, there was confusion everywhere. Rumours, competing claims, the fog of war. But as that fog began to lift, what emerged from Minab was impossible to look away from. Classrooms destroyed with colourful drawings strewn in the rubble. Mothers collapsing in grief. Fathers searching for signs of life where classrooms once stood. Families asking the same unbearable question. Why? Tonight, many here are demanding answers in Iran and justice from the Trump administration, because long after the missiles stop falling, it is scenes like these that we've seen that endure. And once you've seen them, they're very difficult to unsee. That's it for our special coverage from our team in Minab tonight. We've got some developing and breaking news coming from the United States. Police in San Diego say a threat at an Islamic center has been neutralized after officers responded to reports of an active gunman at an Islamic center. During the incident, police said they believed there was at least one shooter, at least one suspected shooter has been killed, and there are no confirmed number of victims at this time. Multiple nearby schools have been placed on lockdown. Well, let's bring in our US correspondent, David Blevins, who's been following the developments for us. And David, just bring us up to date, because, of course, this breaking news came in the last 20 minutes or so.
Yes, Yalda, this is indeed a developing story. Let me tell you what we know. At around 11 7:40 a.m. Pacific time. That's about 7:40 p.m. in the UK. Police received reports of an active shooter at the Islamic Center of San Diego. Aerial footage shows an enormous police and SWAT team response to this. Some of that footage also shows a body on the ground, and our colleagues at NBC are reporting that at least one suspected shooter has been shot dead. San Diego police now saying the threat has been neutralized. No details on casualties yet, but one local hospital says it is receiving patients, plural. The mayor is encouraging people to avoid the area. This is a very residential area about 9 miles north of downtown San Diego. The governor, Gavin Newsom, says he's been briefed and has posted his support for first responders online. What we know about this centre, it's not just a mosque where there are prayers said 5 times a day. The campus includes the Al Rashid School, where they teach Arabic language, Islam and the Quran. And there are reports of students having been in lockdown for a long period of time, both there and in surrounding schools. So police have certainly taken this very seriously indeed. But the very latest we have is that at least one suspected shooter is dead after this at least attempted mass shooting, it would seem, at the largest mosque in San Diego County.
David, thank you so much for that update. Let's focus now on Central Africa, where authorities are struggling to contain an Ebola outbreak. Health officials say a rare strain of the virus has caused more than 300 suspected cases and killed 100 people. The outbreak began in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Eastern Ituri province has been identified as the epicenter, and it's where most of the cases and deaths have been recorded. Ebola is caused by a virus caught from wild animals. It spreads from person to person when you touch infected body fluids. Early symptoms include fever, muscle pain, fatigue, headache, and sore throat. As the virus progresses, patients start to see vomiting, diarrhea, skin rash, and bleeding. The average Ebola disease case fatality rate is around 50%. Well, let's get more now from Professor Salim Abdul Karim, the chair of the Africa CDC Emergency Consultative Group and director at the Centre for the AIDS Programme of Research in South Africa. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us. You know, it does feel slightly like a déjà vu, like we've been here before, just when the world thought that they'd somehow seen the end of Ebola. It now feels like it's made some kind of comeback. Just bring us up to date.
Good evening to you. Yes, it does feel that way. When we think back to 2014 and the huge pandemic that we saw, where cases started in the DRC and then spread to Cote d'Ivoire and multiple countries in Africa, and then across the world. When we look at the current situation, we are now dealing with a different strain of the virus. This strain is called the Bundibugyo strain. It's not the same as the Zairian strain that we saw previously, but clinically it presents in a similar way. The challenge with this particular strain is that we don't actually have widely available diagnostic tools for it. It's not easy in the lab to diagnose it because its unique characteristics make it difficult, and the current usual Ebola tests that we have don't work against it. And in the same way, we don't have treatments for it, and we don't have any vaccine for this particular strain. So the thrust of our efforts right now are to identify each and every case and to do contact tracing and use the standard public health measures of contact tracing, isolation, to limit the spread of this particular virus. And recognizing that, we're now on the back foot because this virus has already been spreading for something like a month or two.
Just help us understand those challenges a little bit more, because the areas where we understand it's spreading is a conflict area, and so how difficult is it then to get to that area, for health workers to operate in that area, and as you say, to try and contain it then?
Absolutely. It's there are many challenges. The logistical challenges are just enormous. The nearest airport is in Tebi, and it's 450 kilometers by road to get to Ituri province. And it's right at that part of the DRC that's close to South Sudan, it's close to Uganda, and it's also a bit of a commercial traffic area. There's people come there to sell their wares and so on. So there's cross-border flow that's quite substantial at that point. So if we look at what is the current situation? So this morning's report from the Africa CDC that we received is that there are 393 suspected cases. There are suspected to be 105 deaths from this disease. The problem is that we don't have laboratory confirmation that any of them are actually this Bujo strain of this particular Ebola virus. And that's been our big challenge, that the laboratory capacity, because of the difficulty in diagnosing it, has held us up. Now that we are expanding the capacity to test for this virus, we can now focus on the task at hand, identify cases. That's key. If we can do that, we can contain it, recognizing that it's already spread to Uganda, but with good public health measures, and remember the DRC has dealt with 16 or 17 other Ebola outbreaks. It knows what to do. It has experience. It has a superb research group, outstanding. So I think we're in good hands with the people on the ground, but there's a lot more that needs there. We need to provide them with the support that they need to get this under control before it starts spreading to other parts of the world.
And that's the point I wanted to pick up on, Doctor. How worried should people be that this will start to spread, even though you say, Uganda, for example, has the facilities, has the experience to be able to contain this and has the facilities. But as we've seen from the past, and you referenced 2014, it did start to spread at a rapid rate across the continent and then beyond. How worried should people be about that repeating?
The scale of, should we be worried like COVID-19? The answer is no, because it's not a respiratory virus. It doesn't spread in that kind of way. Should we be, as not concerned as we were with, say, hantavirus? No, this virus spreads far more than hantavirus does. So it's somewhere in between those two. And overall, what can we glean from our 2014 experience? The first is that we can expect that there are going to be many more cases, and there will be isolated traveler cases identified in other parts of the world, including the UK, because the DRC is a connected country. There are many people, huge mining industry, there are many other industries, people are flying in and out, and so we can expect that there will be, as they've already been in Uganda, travelers from Ituri province who've been there and who had the infection. And the problem then becomes that once there is an imported case, the big challenge becomes reducing the risk of the infection in the healthcare workers. Healthcare workers comprise, one of the most important risk groups. In fact, it's a huge part of the number of current suspected cases actually are healthcare workers, because the virus itself, remember, the original virus comes from fruit bats, and the person who got it, or the persons that got it originally from the fruit bats, those were just one or two individuals. That's a zoonotic transmission. But that person then came to a hospital. And the first case we know of from the 24th of April was a nurse in the hospital in Ituri province. So it's healthcare workers that we really have to care about, and protective equipment for them, ensuring that they have all that they need to protect themselves is going to be critical.
Doctor, we're really grateful for your time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, why the redrawing of congressional lines has become such a contentious issue ahead of the US midterms.
With respect, Minister, answer the question. It's you.
Hello and welcome, I'm Cathy Newman.
So could the outcome of these elections be manipulated? New me, new show, new furniture. Hard news needs a hard chair.
I feel like I'm in therapy.
Oh, there's room for two on this one. Do you think people will take me seriously with my feet up?
Sorry, madam, but we're closing now.
Oh, sorry. Sofa sorted. Let's get this show on the road.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear-gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
They call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
I bet right now you often find yourself asking why. Why was a certain decision taken? Why did something happen? Why did they say or do that? I'm Neil Patterson, and it's my job as a journalist to find out why. Just explain why.
It's a difficult one.
Well, I mean, it's massive.
It's a very, very severe situation.
So if you want to make sense of this complicated world, Sky News' new podcast, This Is Why, is your daily fix. One story every day, and we can find out why together. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Donald Trump has been accused of trading civil rights for Republican votes as America's election map is redrawn. Both Republicans and Democrats are hoping to boost their chances in this year's midterm elections by changing the borders on voting districts in their favour. In Memphis, it means the spiritual home of the civil rights movement is now in the same district as the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. So what does it mean to be black in America when your vote no longer counts like it used to? David Blevins travelled to Tennessee to find out.
This is an attempt to dilute my vote.
It's called redistricting, and it's redefining America.
It's unconstitutional, it's unfair, and they're trying to suppress the black vote.
Is Donald Trump tearing up civil rights to boost his chances of holding on to power?
This is white supremacy, straight up white supremacy.
To answer that question, we've come to the Deep South, to Memphis, Tennessee. It's the home of the blues, but it's being forced red by the redrawing of election maps in midterm election year. A process that has wiped out the only majority black voting district in this entire state.
I never thought that I would be in a position where I'm fighting for the rights that my grandparents and my great-grandparents already fought for.
Split down the middle, this is Shotwell Street, the latest dividing line in America. 9th District, the only Democratic seat here, has been carved up to benefit Republicans. But it's the only majority black district in Tennessee.
They try to dress it up, that this is about politics and numbers. No, it's about politics and racism.
Voters choose representation. Representatives don't choose voters.
Dr. King was shot at the Lorraine Motel.
They've been here before. This community knows all about struggle. It was here that Martin Luther King gave his last speech and breathed his last breath.
And the shot rang out. Kapow!
District 9 is holy ground to the civil rights movement.
How do you feel about the fact that it's happening in the very district where your father paid the ultimate price?
I mean, voting is fundamental to what democracy represents. So as it relates to my father particularly, yes, he was there in Memphis and was gunned down in Memphis. So it is like a devastating blow.
Hopes of the past now replaced by fears of the present. Fears that this city is losing its soul.
Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Old times here are not forgotten. And there are a lot of people, especially in the rural areas, which is the MAGA areas and the Republican areas, that have never forgotten the Civil War. They've never gotten over it.
The future's unclear for his constituents. Steve Cohen is the congressman whose seat's been commandeered.
He's evil incarnate. And he wants these seats. The most evil, degenerate, thieving president in the history of the United States.
Both parties are scrambling to redraw maps, but the president is winning this race, backed by the Supreme Court.
That's the kind of ruling I like. Some states don't need to redraw, and some do.
Republicans have added most seats, making it much harder for Democrats to flip the House of Representatives in November.
President Trump has been very integral in this whole process.
Trump ally Brent Taylor now sees a seat for the taking.
We drew these boundaries for political purposes. We want to maintain the Republican majority in Congress. That's not a secret.
But redistricting means much more than politics in a place like this.
Memphis is a 64% black city. It's the blackest city in the entire country. And to combine it with the same district that the Ku Klux Klan was founded in is truly unconscionable.
But there are two sides to this story. So we headed east to a place of politics and prayer.
Lord, I ask that you be with us as we seek to do the things that need to be done to make it a better place to live.
The monthly meeting of Republicans in Bolivar. They are right behind their president's power move and reject claims of racism.
I think people assume whites are voting one way and blacks are voting another way, and it's not true.
I think everybody's trying to win, and it's gamesmanship now. If you believe you're right and you want to win and do the right thing, you're going to do everything in the world to retain power and win.
We've got people on both sides of the line, a lot of friends that are on both sides of that line, but really, I would love to see just everyone come together and serve what's best, or do what's best for Tennessee.
Bolivar is 70 miles from Memphis. They're now in the same voting district, but there's a world of difference between them. When the sun goes down in one, the lights come up in the other.
From blues to country to rock and roll, the music of Memphis is its own map of American history. But the city of Elvis, B.B. King and Otis Redding is getting a political makeover, and there's nothing these streets can do about it. This is Donald Trump's town now, and in his quest to hold on to power, it's now or never.
When she's gone too long.
So far, 8 US states have redrawn their congressional districts, with around 4 more currently in the process. Every time a state's lines are redrawn, the party that proposed the change gains seats ahead of the midterms. Just 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court of Virginia blocked changes that would have given Democrats another 4 seats in the House. And as you've been hearing, in Memphis, one of the black majority seats in the US South has been erased. Well, let's speak now to Amir Badat, voting rights attorney and political strategist at Fair Fight Action. Thank you so much, Amir, for joining us. Just talk to us about how this redistricting, and redrawing of these maps is redefining things.
Well, Fair Fight Action and Black Voters Matter Fund jointly published a report near the end of last year that showed that without the protections of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which was the statute before the Supreme Court in the Calais lawsuit, without those protections, then southern states could redraw up to 19 of the congressional districts in Congress in the United States. That would essentially allow an entrenchment of one-party rule of one chamber of Congress and would decimate Black and Hispanic political representation at the congressional level. And what we're seeing in the aftermath of the Supreme Court's decision is states in the South rushing through the door that the Supreme Court has now opened for discrimination against Black voters and voters of color around the country, but in particular in the South. That started with Tennessee, and we're seeing the process now play out in Louisiana, in Alabama, in South Carolina, and several other states are going to follow as well.
So basically, you're saying that these changes impacts representation of these communities.
Absolutely. I mean, these are people, these are elected officials who make decisions that impact individuals' day-to-day lives. That is felt at the congressional level, where these members of Congress are making decisions about the budget, about whether or not this country goes to war, about access to health care. But it's also felt at every other level of government in the American system. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act applied not only to congressional districts, it also applies to state legislatures. It also applies to local governmental bodies like city councils and school boards and election commissions. And these are entities that make incredibly important policy decisions that will impact individuals' day-to-day lives. And I want to be clear, it's not just an issue that affects Black voters. It's an issue that affects all American voters, because what we've seen is that Black elected officials and elected officials who are chosen by Black voters have oftentimes been at the forefront of progress in America, whether that's on deciding issues related to public education, issues related to healthcare. Those have been the issues that they've championed, and those are the issues that impact the vast majority of American people.
Amir, do you think then it's discouraging voters, or are people sort of, now voting with their feet and trying to bring fundamental changes?
Well, what we've seen over the past few weeks since we had the decision in Calais is a huge upswell of outrage, of engagement, of people moving, like you said, with their feet to actions, rallies, protests at state capitals, demanding that their legislators not pass new discriminatory maps. We've seen just this weekend thousands of people from all across the country, from all across the South, come into Montgomery, Alabama, which is in many ways the cradle of the civil rights movement, where we saw so many important actions take place. We saw more than 5,000 people come together on Saturday for a day of action, a rally of people coming together in community, voicing their objections for what's going on. And so I think that people are energized, people are engaged, and like I said, people are angry. This was a lawless decision from the Supreme Court, and I think people are making their voices heard about it.
Are they being heard?
Well, that's a separate question. They weren't heard in Tennessee by the legislature because the legislature passed a discriminatory map despite all of the action taking place in Tennessee. And now we're seeing states like Louisiana rush to pass a discriminatory map. Alabama passed a law that allows it to hold a separate election. And the Supreme Court basically gave it the green light to do that for Congress under a discriminatory map. And so state legislators in the South that are pushing forward these maps are ignoring the concerns of voters across the country and of Black voters across the South. But I think what we will see in November is a huge demonstration of opposition to what is going on right now. And people are going to make their voices heard at the ballot box, even if they're not heard in state legislatures.
And just briefly, I have about a minute left, but sort of what tools or protections do you believe are urgently needed to safeguard people in their districts?
Well, there are a number of different things that can be adopted to fill the gap that now exists because of the Calais decision. One is federal legislation that would bolster the protections of the Voting Rights Act even beyond what we had before Calais. There's also state level legislation that many states have already passed, state voting rights acts that do similar things to what the existing Voting Rights Act did, and that would still be permissible under the Calais standard. But more fundamentally, we are going to need to re-envision what democracy looks like in the United States, because this is not just a question of how do we fill the gap. This is a question of how do we rebuild democracy in a vision that actually works for everyone.
Amr, we're really grateful for your time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I just want to bring you an update on that developing story in San Diego, where authorities say one suspect in a shooting at an Islamic center is dead. The specific motive for the shooting has not been released by police, nor has the name of the suspect. It's unclear if there are additional injuries or fatalities. Let's just have a quick listen in.
We have 3 confirmed adults that are deceased at the Islamic Center. There is a lot of preliminary information that we're going to try to highlight and cover, but understand it's going to take us some time to get accurate information out to everyone.
And that was that press conference there from San Diego. We'll have much more next at 10.
At about 11:43, we received a call of an active shooter.